Did you know that Voldemort's Return takes up 3 whole chapters in the Goblet of Fire book, and each chapter is devoted to a specific part of that process? The ritual, the return of the Death Eaters, and finally his duel with Harry. Meanwhile, the movie only spends about 10 minutes on this part of the story, and I've got to admit, they did a pretty good job. If you're new here, my name is Gibby, and in this series I analyze each chapter of the Harry Potter books, compare them with the movie scene by scene, and find all the differences. Because why not? It's been few and far between in this series that I've actually agreed with the decisions made for the Harry Potter movies. Most of the time I side with the book, especially regarding the Goblet of Fire. While it's an entertaining movie, it is very difficult to compare it to the book and not see the glaring flaws throughout. There are dozens of characters, plot lines, and important foreshadowing moments that never get shown on screen for one reason or another. However, this week, as we've reached Voldemort's return in the graveyard of Little Hangleton, I'm shocked at just how much I agree with the film adaptation. I have to admit, this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie series, simply because it's the climactic moment in which Voldemort officially reincarnates, not on the back of someone's head or as a memory of his 16-year-old self. He actually returns in physical form. And despite the debate in the fandom, I love Ralph Fiennes' look and portrayal of Voldemort. So I was excited to pick up my pen and paper and start analyzing the scene compared to the book to find all the differences. And in today's video, I'm going to reveal to you each of the distinctive differences between the book and movie for this iconic moment. And maybe by the end, you'll see my side of things and agree that for once, the Goblet of Fire movie might have actually done the right thing. Welcome back to episode 58 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter edition. Like I said, my name is Gibby, and this is my channel, Factor Fantasy Harry Potter. Each week, we talk about the lore of the wizarding world. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to like and subscribe, and share this with a fellow Potterhead. As always, I want to give a big shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, Robo Steve, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes between this scene and its corresponding chapters in the book across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what actually happened in this scene. That way, it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up from where we left off last week, Harry and Cedric meet at the Triwizard Cup at the same time in the maze, and as the storm approaches, they take it together. This teleports them to a spooky graveyard, and neither of them know what has happened. As they slowly get up, Cedric takes a look around, and Harry sees a cauldron as well as a gravestone that says Tom Riddle. Realizing that they need to leave, Harry tells Cedric to get back to the portkey, but they're already too late. Wormtail steps out from the shadows with baby Voldy, and Harry's scar explodes in pain. Cedric puts up his wand, but after a command from Voldy, Wormtail kills him. This leaves Harry alone, writhing in pain on the ground. Wormtail uses magic to pin him to the large tombstone of Riddle Sr., and then he begins the ritual. He gets the bones of Tom Riddle Sr., cuts off his own hand, and then gets the blood of Harry as a finishing touch. After some magic-y stuff happens, Voldemort returns with his robes forming around him. Then Voldemort uses Wormtail's dark mark to summon the Death Eaters. He reprimands each of them for not searching for him over the last 13 years, and then he rewards Wormtail by giving him a new hand. After remembering that Harry is there, Voldemort taunts him, gives a short explanation as to his original fall, and then gives Harry back his wand so they can duel. After torturing Harry for a bit, Harry is able to escape behind another tombstone. But he soon gets the courage to face death and walks out to meet Voldemort. He then casts his trademark spell at the same time that Voldemort does Avada Kedavra, and their spells meet in the middle, connecting their wands. This is when the ghost-like figures pop out and Harry sees his parents again. They distract Voldemort for just long enough so that Harry can escape with Cedric's body, and that is where we're stopping things for this week. We'll finish off the movie in the next episode. So now that you're refreshed and you understand what the movie did for this scene, let's dive into our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. Why cover these first? Well, because this week they're really simple. First, there's only one character truly missing, and that's Bertha Jorkins. If you've been watching this series, you'll know that she's popped up in almost every single episode. And finally, we'll get some answers in this episode regarding her disappearance. Then for timeline and location, we don't really have any crazy changes. The graveyard is accurate, and the time it takes place is accurate as well. The only timing issue is the fact that it's much more drawn out in the book, but that's it. If this is your first time watching the series, just know that this is rare, and usually there are quite a few character, timeline, and location changes. But this week we are spared, which means we can jump right into our plot differences. Of course, before we go into the plot, I always give a massive disclaimer here to clarify that my job isn't to go through the dialogue word for word and find every line changed. If there's a significant difference in information, I'll make sure to mention it. But otherwise, I avoid going into dialogue because that could take forever if I pointed out each word change between the book and movie script. However, if you're wanting to relive the book dialogue for yourself, I highly recommend checking out the audiobooks on Audible. Whether you're wanting to listen to the classic Jim Dale narration or check out the brand new full cast audiobooks, Audible's got you covered. And so does my link in the description. Check it out below to get your first month for free, which includes one free audiobook of your choice. You can cancel at any time, and I believe you keep the audiobook even if you cancel, so that's pretty cool. Plus, it's a win-win because each free audiobook supports the channel. Anyway, enough yapping about that, let's dive into the plot changes. The first thing I need to address here at the beginning of these 3 chapters is the fact that Harry is severely injured during this whole scene. If you didn't see my last episode, we talked about how Harry and Cedric fought off a giant spider in the maze before taking the Triwizard Cup and teleporting to the graveyard. During that fight, Harry's leg actually got bit by the spider, and then he got dropped from a high place and he landed on that bitten leg. So he essentially can't walk on one leg. I'm not sure if it's broken or just in pain from being bitten and falling on it, but either way, it's important to note that unlike the movie, Harry in the book is quite injured by the time he falls into the graveyard. Next, Harry doesn't recognize the graveyard or see the Riddle tombstone until after Cedric is killed. In the movie, Harry immediately recognizes his surroundings and practically begs Cedric to leave. This might be the only annoying part of this scene for me, and it's that Cedric seems to be a dummy in the movie. But in the book, Harry is just as confused as Cedric, and Cedric is the one who suggests that they keep their wands out and stay alert. Then out of the shadows comes a figure in a cloak who is holding something wrapped up in his arms like a baby. And speaking of this figure, our next change is that Wormtail is completely covered up, unlike the movie which shows him almost exactly as we left him in the previous film. In the book, it's a subtle point, but you can obviously tell that J.K. Rowling is trying to communicate the shame and guilt that Wormtail feels. He's so ashamed that he covers himself up and doesn't want Harry to see him. It's almost as if this will make it easier for him to commit the atrocity that he's about to commit. The whole time he is panting and whining and seems very reluctant to do the whole thing, and Harry doesn't recognize him until after he is bound up and grabbed. He can tell the person is missing a finger, and he puts the pieces together that this figure is Wormtail. And speaking of being bound up, that brings us to the next change, which is that Harry doesn't get pinned on the tombstone by a moving statue. Instead, Wormtail uses magic to conjure ropes and bind him to the stone. This makes a lot more sense, as I always thought that Harry in the movie looked as though he could escape if he wanted to. On top of this, in the book, Wormtail gags him with a cloth, so Harry can't speak or yell out the whole time. Now moving on to Voldemort's return, the ritual is actually pretty accurate. Aside from some of the words being switched around or removed, Wormtail does the exact thing in both versions, and the end result is the same: Voldemort returns. The change, however, is the fact that in the book, it's a large stone cauldron, and it doesn't disappear. A man simply emerges from the cauldron. Additionally, robes don't just materialize out of thin air. Wormtail has Voldemort's old robes prepared along with his wand, and he fetches them for the newly formed man in the cauldron. Then Voldemort gets dressed and steps outside. And this leads us to our first and only omitted moment, which is that Voldemort actually speaks to Harry before the Death Eaters arrive. The Death Eaters don't just appear immediately, but rather it takes a minute or two before they start emerging from the shadows. So after calling for them, Voldemort talks to Harry and explains some of the history of where they're at. He explains that Harry is on the grave of Tom Riddle Sr., a muggle who left Voldemort's mother after learning she was a witch. And by the way, if you're interested in Voldemort's complete family history and lore, I've got 2 whole videos on that, and they're some of my favorite on the whole channel, so be sure to check those out. Next up though, we finally get to the moment when the Death Eaters arrive, and this is literally a whole chapter in the book. Like I said, this scene is broken up into 3 chapters. First, the ritual, second, the Death Eaters, and third, the duel. So now we're past the first chapter and into the second, which contains Voldemort's very long monologue to his followers. I don't really consider this entirely an omitted moment because we still do get some of this in the movie. The difference is that the movie is about 1/10 the length. In the book, he reprimands his followers, saying that he won't forgive them until they've served him for 13 years to repay the last 13 years of his absence. They bow to him and kiss the hem of his robes, and some of them get tortured with the Cruciatus curse. Voldemort also acknowledges the Death Eaters who are missing, some of them dead and some of them not there. The Lestranges obviously are in Azkaban, and Voldemort says that they'll be rewarded for their loyalty. Then Voldemort mentions one who has run away, one who has turned to the other side, and one who is still faithful and remains at Hogwarts. I could be wrong, but I believe he's referring to Karkaroff, Snape, and Barty Crouch Jr., but correct me in the comments if that assumption is incorrect. The next change here kind of stems off of this, but I'm splitting it into a separate difference because it's such an extended section of dialogue. Essentially, Voldemort goes through his entire story from the time he was defeated in Godric's Hollow to his return now. He starts by openly admitting that he made a mistake, a miscalculation in which he didn't foresee the magic of love that protected Harry, causing his spell to rebound and hit him instead. He then recounts the years that he was on the run, little more than a spirit, and constantly on the brink of death. We learn about his attempt to return in Harry's first and second years, and eventually Wormtail found him in the Forest of Albania the year before by talking to other rats, who told him of an evil spirit that lived in those woods. And this is where we learn about Bertha Jorkins. Evidently, Wormtail had ran into Bertha in a pub in Albania and somehow convinced her to follow him into the night. He then overpowered her and brought her to Voldemort, who got information out of her that was most important. Voldemort learned from her that one of his most faithful servants was free from Azkaban, and he also learned that the Triwizard Tournament would take place at Hogwarts that coming year. So Voldemort crafted a plan to once and for all return, and in the process, kill Harry Potter. Bertha Jorkins was of course murdered after her memory was extracted, and most people agree that it was her murder that created the Horcrux in Nagini, who is actually present during this whole thing, by the way. As I'm making this video, I'm realizing that might be considered a character change that I didn't mention earlier, since we don't see her in this scene of the movie, I don't think. In the book, she's slithering around in the graveyard the whole time. Anyway, after this entire chapter of Voldemort talking to his followers, he finally releases Harry and gives him his wand. And then the next chapter picks back up with the start of their duel, if you can even call it that. Again, the movie essentially gets most of these details correct, but just shorten things up a bit. Voldemort makes Harry bow, he uses the Cruciatus curse on him, and everything else is pretty in line with the book. There are only a couple small details which got removed from the movie version to save time. The first one is that Voldemort tries to use the Imperius curse on Harry, and the key word there is tries. You see, we learned earlier in this year that Harry is pretty good at resisting Imperio. Fake Moody had taught his students about it in Defense Against the Dark Arts, which is something that the movies never showed, and Harry had resisted Moody's attempts pretty well. So in the graveyard, when Harry wouldn't say something that Voldemort wanted him to say, he tried to use the Imperius curse on him. But Harry resisted and shouted, "I won't." This outburst shut up the laughing Death Eaters and Voldemort. Everyone stared at Harry amazed that he could resist the will of the most powerful dark wizard of their time. And it's during this strange incident, while everyone is in shock, that Harry runs behind a tombstone. But remember, his leg is pretty badly injured, so just like in the movie, he realizes he doesn't have a chance of running away, and he decides to look Voldemort in the eyes and at least attempt to fight. Which brings us to the last few changes for this episode, which all have to do with Harry and Voldemort's wand connection. First, when their wands connect, Voldemort and Harry are both levitated off the ground. Not too high, but it does say they float up and then the half dome encases them, keeping the Death Eaters out. To be honest, I don't mind the movie version because I think there's a certain point at which you might think something is a little fake or cheesy if you see it visually. The thing about adapting a magical movie is balancing realism versus fantasy. So keeping their feet on the ground during this duel might have actually been a decent decision. If they had attempted to use CGI or practical effects to make them levitate, I think it would have looked a little surreal and too fake. Second, the people who come out of Voldemort's wand give Harry encouragement. We read that each person, including Bertha Jorkins, walks over to Harry and whispers words of encouragement to him, and then they walk over to Voldemort and hiss something at him that Harry can't hear. I think this is a hilarious detail because I can just imagine each of them going over and obviously rooting for Harry and rooting against Voldemort. I wish I knew what those ghosts were saying to him, but I guess we'll never know. Third, the next change is the Phoenix song that comes out of their connection. If you didn't know or don't remember, Harry and Voldemort's wands have a special connection, which is that they share the same core, a phoenix feather. And this phoenix feather is actually from Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix. Something we learn in the Chamber of Secrets that never got shown in the movie is that phoenixes have beautiful singing, and that phoenix song, the Song of Fawkes, explodes out of their wands during this connection. It's a beautiful song of courage and hope and love that helps Harry persevere just long enough to survive. And speaking of surviving, that brings us to the final change, which is that after the ghost-like figures block Voldemort's vision, Harry runs past the stunned Death Eaters and hides. He then continues to make mad dashes towards Cedric's body, all while the Death Eaters shoot stun spells at him. Eventually, he does make it to Cedric, but he doesn't have the Triwizard Cup. Voldemort and the Death Eaters catch up to him, and Voldemort stands above him with an evil smile. But right as Voldemort begins the killing curse, Harry shouts Accio, and the Triwizard Cup flies at him and he grabs it, teleporting him and Cedric back to Hogwarts, just about a second before the killing curse came down right where Harry was laying. And that is the climactic ending of this week's episode. There were probably a lot less changes than you thought there would be. It's good to know that they at least stayed mostly true to the most pivotal moment in the book. They obviously knew that this was the most important part of the series so far, and so wanted to be accurate to Rowling's version, which I appreciate even despite their timing. And in some ways, I can appreciate their timing because I don't need to hear the whole 20-minute monologue from Voldemort every time. And to me, that context isn't really necessary in the movies. We don't need to hear about the force of Albania and his time leeching off of rats and animals in the woods. But anyway, enough of what I think. What do you think? Would you have changed anything about this scene in the movie, or do you like it the way it is? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, check out the series playlist on my channel to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.